Welcome to the American Institute of Stress's official podcast, Finding Contentment. The goal of this podcast is to highlight new information about stress and stress management techniques. While we understand that stress is a very personalized issue and different for everyone, we hope to help you find your own way to contentment.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. Greetings. Welcome back to Finding Contentment, the official podcast of the American Institute of Stress. I'm your host, Will Heckman, also the executive director. I want to thank you for joining us again today. If this is your first time, this podcast has to do with stress and stress-related issues. And remember, if you're watching us on YouTube, to hit that subscribe button. It's over there in the corner. Really appreciate it. Hit the like button. You're really helping us out. And if you're listening on the Wellness Warrior podcast, welcome. Glad to meet you all, and glad you could join us. I want to ask you folks if you could all, besides hitting the subscribe and like button, to consider making a donation to the American Institute of Stress. You know, we are a nonprofit, and your help support and strengthen and sustain our legacy of science-based stress management education. We're the leader in the field. We need your help. So consider doing that. Just go to stress.org and you'll find out how to do that. I think you can send a check, money. Pretty soon we'll take Bitcoin. So just feel free to go to stress.org. Okay. We're talking today about building healthy habits and to battle something that most of us are feeling, and that's burnout. And if you're not burnt out already, well, you're probably starting to feel a little crispy around the edges. You know, when this current pandemic comes to an end, and eventually it will, many of us will have lived through all kinds of stresses and losses, including the losses of friends and loved ones due to the virus. Some of us have lost jobs. People have gone through bankruptcy of their business or foreclosure on their homes. And for some people, their marriages and other relationships have crumbled because they were self-isolated for so long. And many people have mounting financial hardships. If the research on natural disasters serve as a guide, because we really have no statistics yet about this pandemic. That's coming in the next few years, I'm sure. But if we use natural disasters to serve as a guide, then the current pandemic, there's an estimated that 10% of the people will develop severe psychological problems, such as mood disorders and anxiety disorders, or even PTSD. But that percentage could be much higher. You know, in the wake of the SARS outbreak back in 2003, many people, for example, found that that survived the SARS but were severely affected by it. They found out a 4-year study afterward that, you know, out of 70 survivors, 44% develop PTSD. And that's a big number, and even after recovering from it. So those are serious sufferers, not everybody. So today we're going to be discussing some of the ways that we can build resilience and fight back against the stress and burnout by rebuilding some healthy habits. And I asked a friend of mine, an old friend and a colleague, to join us today, Beth Romanski. For those of you that don't know, some of you do, especially if you're listening in the Wellness Warrior podcast. Beth is a seasoned higher education professional, and currently she's serving as in the role of Director of Professional and Continuing Education and adjunct faculty member of the Maryland University of Integrative Health. It's a leading academic institution solely dedicated to integrative health programs. A professional health educator, but Beth also holds a certification as an integrative nutrition health coach and is the founder of My Healthy Transitions Health Coaching, and she hosts the Wellness Warrior radio podcast. So make sure you go to myhealthytransitions.com to learn more about what she does. She's helped me with my nutrition and given me some great advice. So Beth, thanks for joining us again today. It's always a pleasure to have you back.
Thank you, Will. That was really interesting statistics you shared in the opening. I'm really grateful to be here again with you on your podcast. I find your resources invaluable, and the work that you do is so needed now more than ever.
Thank you. It's very nice to hear, and we never get tired of hearing how we're helping a lot of people, and we've been getting a lot of people saying that they've been coming to the site and finding some really good information. You know, the last time you and I did a podcast together, we talked about stress and giving yourself permission to slow down, and that was received really well. But that was a little while ago, and a lot has happened since then. This pandemic and all the other things that are causing what I call the stress pandemic, and I really believe there is one. But can you tell us a little bit about what we have learned about ourselves, if anything, going through this pandemic? I hope we've learned a few things. And also, okay, so once we go through this and we've learned some things, what happens now? What's next?
Well, I can't say, reading the horoscope and saying the tea leaves or anything of that nature. I can say what I've experienced, what I've observed in my world. However, just as I approach health and well-being, there is no one size fits all when it comes to health, and there is no one size fits all when it comes to the pandemic experience. And so I think we've all taken from it different things. I personally have gained a lot of introspection in terms of what's important in life, and we've seen by the Great Resignation how many other people are in the same boat. They may not feel that workism is completely all they want out of life, and they want more flexibility. They want to have a life that involves work and career and purpose and meaning, but there's also community and well-being, and mental and emotional health have become so important to everybody in terms of just realizing what even a pandemic can do. But this is, I think, something that we should have been talking about long before a pandemic, and we will be talking about long after we get past a specific pandemic experience, which is why I wanted to approach this podcast on stress and burnout from a long-term, holistic, sustainable approach, because it's not to say like this is necessarily all situational. And I would say that typically, stress and burnout, I mean, there have been high statistics on that already, but the Mental Health America had put out some recent statistics and report, and Americans have exhibited the highest levels of stress since April 2020. There's even something that's been coined in a buzzword out there called languishing, which isn't necessarily depression or a really diagnosable condition, but the languishing feeling is that meh. Yeah. The emoji was just kind of the straight meh face, where you're not feeling motivated for life. You've lost all purpose and meaning and yourself, and it's the absence of well-being, right?
Right.
And so there's this continuum of well-being that I think needs to be discussed. It's not like you are healthy or not healthy, you're resilient or not resilient. So I feel like all of this fluctuates in a continuum, but by being more resilient, by building up some long-term sustainable strategies, which we'll get to in this podcast, you can be more capable and ready to bounce back, or as I like to even say, bounce forward, because this should contain some personal growth. But that's just the opportunity when you have challenges in your life. And you can grow and learn from these challenges. You've done it before. I'm sure many listeners can think about times in their life where they face adversity, rough situations, and it's not all easy by any means. And it doesn't always turn out, to the best, where people are always thinking, everything's going to be fine. Well, this is life. We have to realize stress is part of life. And how can we support each other and ourselves in navigating through these circumstances? So for me, I've had some silver linings. I've had some challenges, certainly. Maybe I've been more privileged than others, of course, which I've been more aware of, which I think is also something that we can take from this, is trying to look at the inequities that exist within our systems and world. So there's just so much to list, but I think that this conversation that you're bringing up is important. It's a place to start with what we can do next. What is our not our new normal, but what is our way of being? What is our normal? You know, what normal is kind of a thing that I don't even like. Normal doesn't. There is no normal. It's what works for you at this stage in your life, at this phase, right?
You know, you brought up some really good points. One of them, and I love the phrase that you use, languishing, because I've seen that going on. People have this sense of hopelessness. This is never going to end. This is just dragging on, and it like sucks the life out of some of the people that I've seen. And I go, well, hold on, this is just something we're going through. And the other thing you talked about, the community. People ask me sometimes about, and they compare this to the Spanish flu 100 years ago. The difference is your community then was probably your block. Now we know everything that's going on in the world. So our community has increased, and a lot of people are talking about, as you said, feeling the resilience and that burnout, which have become like real buzzwords that were never used before. People never talked about resilience. It didn't come up in a normal conversation. But those words, we hear them a lot lately in the media, in our community. Tell us how stress really relates to what we're talking about today, that feeling of being burnt out. And that maybe that causes that languishing and that hopelessness.
Yeah, it's a continuum, and I will say, as always, you know, I'm a health educator and health coach, so I would encourage those that are feeling like they need more professional licensed medical advice about this to seek out those resources, because they are available. But with that being said, the stress burnout continuum really is a phased process from what I understand and from how I've experienced it. So not all stress is bad. You know, you need sometimes, like I said, life includes some stressful situations in some positions. The healthcare workers, healthcare field, the first responders, you know, there are professions that are more exposed to stressful situations on an ongoing basis. Hence, you know, physician burnout, healthcare worker burnout is extremely high. It's like 99% on one of the research studies that I read, which is literally everybody in the field, right? Educators really experience extremely high levels of burnout. And it becomes that stress is something you can sort of manage, navigate to a certain situation. It's more related to a circumstance. Whereas when it becomes a strain and chronic, that's where the health implications are starting to compile and add up, right? And people don't realize, you know, a pain or inflammation may be related to stress, or, you know, they're not sleeping, they can't concentrate, they have, you know, no control over their moods, and their appetite is all over the place, and, you know, just things that are more observable. And it gets into more of the serious health conditions and diseases that we all know are very, I think, more common than should be, right? More preventable than they seem to be. But I think that what happens is that burnout is the unmanageable, the long-term, the chronic, when you become detached. So for burnout, there are, you know, I guess different varying degrees, varying assessments, if you will, or inventories or surveys that you can take. I think one of the common ones is the Maslach Burnout Inventory, the MBI, where the questions pertain to emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and that, you know, lack of personal accomplishment. And so burnout, I think, has been used, but I don't think that as many people have necessarily experienced it as now. And I think that's why people are very interested in the topic and it's being brought up because it was coined, I believe in the 70s, it was. And it's not something that's relatively new. It's relatively new, the 70s, by a psychologist. But I still think that it's more commonplace than it has been ever. And I think that stress is the leading avenue to becoming burnt out, if that makes sense.
Sure does. Being a former educator, being a former first responder, I've seen burnout. But I kind of expected it in some of these professions. I'm seeing everybody feeling a little crispy right now, so that's why I asked you. It's so. Is it just this pandemic that's made it so more prevalent?
I don't think so. I think it's the culture as well that we live in. Burnout was originally classified and conceptualized as defined by the World Health Organization as an occupational circumstance. And now I think that definition has increasingly expanded towards applying to personal situations, not just related to work. However, related to work, you might feel energy depletion, exhaustion, increased mental distance from your job, feelings of negativism or cynicism, and reduced professional efficacy. So organizations, I believe, should be more interested in preventing employee burnout than they possibly are. And it's not just going to be solved by a stress management seminar.
Right.
It needs to be a complete culture shift in creating a culture of wellness where employee well-being is prioritized and modeled, in my opinion, versus it being, stop being so stressed. We have limited resources and being more productive. And I mean, that messaging, as you can see, people aren't really tolerating it anymore. And I think these helping professions, educators, healthcare workers, these types of situations really put us into a scenario where we want to help, we want to work, we enjoy our profession perhaps even, and we're inspired by it. For me, I love what I do, but one of the early stages of burnout can be overworking. You just push yourself harder when you know you shouldn't be. How many of us have done that? Entrepreneurs, right? How many people are out there? We're trying to make something of the world and do something, but at the sake of our own health and our own self-care. And that's where I think we need to find this equilibrium a little bit better so that we aren't depleting ourselves so much that we become very ill and sick and really just, if we're not ill and sick, not really great to be around or have a good quality of life. So I think that even stressed out career-driven people, because of our culture and perhaps the disease of busyness or this badge of honor that we wear, depending on how busy you are, makes you a better worker or human being and with more value, I think maybe is misaligned. And there are a lot of people who are now thinking that maybe that isn't the path that they want to follow, right?
That's true. And we get a lot of questions about workplace stress. And it always comes up. It always has come up. It's just coming up differently now. A lot more people and a lot more professions are feeling it right now. And that's why people are talking about burnout as much as they are. They also talk about resilience, which that never really came up before. And except for people like you and I who are in the stress management business, we talked about resilience and how to build that capacity to be more resilient. But you've been doing this quite a while. For the people out there who have heard this term, this buzzword used, how do you define resilient to them? And can we build our capacity to be more resilient, or is it just our nature?
These are great questions you're asking. I ask the same things because by no means will I say I'm an expert. I'm an experiencer of all of these things. I've experienced burnout. Obviously, I experienced stress. And I tend to think of myself as a fairly resilient individual. But that also takes the self-awareness, mindfulness, self-care, positive relationships, and purpose to be resilient. So it's an act of individual effort, I believe. It doesn't happen to you. but it's something that requires actual engagement, just as health involves, it involves a participation. And I think that for the APA, for example, they define resilience as adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or even significant sources of stress. However, I would argue that perhaps that doesn't necessarily have to be so traumatic anymore. We can have trauma in little micro ways.
Right.
People don't realize that PTSD often is, classified in a military situation, and by all means, that is completely valid. I don't want to, by any means say that I have that personal experience and would know what that's like. However, I will say that people can experience, trauma, job losses, losses of family and friends. These are also experiences that happen to a lot of people, and maybe there's a health concern. And so I think that these things are all aspects that we need to build, no matter what profession, no matter who we are. And resilience, interestingly, apparently can be measured in research studies in labs in biomarkers, things like blood pressure, stress hormones, immune function, and gene methylation. But for me, it's really about making it more relevant and applicable. I'd rather not say, measure myself all the time or wear all these, contraptions to decide whether or not I'm stressed or not, or if I'm burnout or not, or resilient or not. For me, it's kind of an intuition. And I think that there are resiliency qualities that may make people more, resilient people, just generally speaking. So common traits may be people that are more flexible. And that's hard. I'm not a very flexible person naturally, but I've become that through personal growth and development. People who are more optimistic. I am certainly one of those people. I'm a positive person, so I have that on my side. And more people that have confidence in themselves and their abilities. So, you have that voice in your head where you talk to yourself like, I can do this. I can get through this. I've done this before. This is the reality. This is what's happening. There's a story in my head that I'm telling myself, et cetera, et cetera. So these positive goal-oriented self-talks, those can be helpful, believe it or not, even though it may sound a little crazy. And then when people see, challenges as opportunities versus threats. So it's more about shifting your mindset and perspective. I think that those things can be cultivated, even though it may be easier for some people than others.
Those are really good points. And I think you're right. Perspective plays a big role in that resilience. And I like the definition that it's how we adapt to things, because we do have to be adaptive. I was talking to someone the other day, and we were talking about what people do when they're stressed and they feel burnt out, and what do they do? And the first thing we do is usually bad. And I said to him, "What? Well, why? Why do people reach for for me, sometimes it's an ice cream cone, but sometimes it's a beer, sometimes it's a drug, sometimes it's worse." And I said, "Well, why?" And they set me straight, and they said, "Well, because they work." And I said, "Oh, well, that's true, but you can't sustain yourself for a very long time treating your stress with things that eventually are going to do you in." Now, you're a health coach, and you talk to people all the time about that, so how do we maintain, are there tips for maintaining healthy habits instead of going to those bad ones?
Well, honestly, as a health coach, I do see a lot of this. And I will say that someone has to be open and willing to make positive changes and healthy behaviors. You can't force anybody or, convince anybody to do anything. And so I've had that personally, even, within my own circle. And I think that's hard to accept, but you do have control over yourself, your own self-agency. There may be circumstances that are really outside of your control. So I try to have people focus on what they have control over, because we have more control over our mindset, our reactions. certain things are choices in most instances. And I can't say that there's good or bad, black and white. I think that it's going to be, again, individualized to what works for someone to make these healthy habits long-term and sustainable. I will say that the good or bad notion sometimes even prevents people from wanting to do the right thing because they feel like, well, just forget it. So I would tell people to start where they are. First of all, don't compare yourself to others. And first of all, practice something that's called mindfulness, and that's awareness without judgment. So just observe for maybe a day or 21 days or however long you want to. A day is easy, right? Observe your reactions to stress. Observe your behaviors. Don't try to change anything. Don't judge yourself. Just observe. That's step one. All right, so focusing on the present, that can have a positive impact on your health and well-being. It can also, by the National Institutes of Health, they also say that can lower your blood pressure, improve sleep, and help you cope with pain even. So there's reason to be more mindful. And then become what we call practice the meta-awareness, and that's being aware of what we're aware of. And it's just becoming more attuned to what you do when you're feeling stressed, because if you undereat, overeat, like whatever people do to cope, that's okay. I mean, obviously we want to find ways to have positive coping behaviors, but I don't ever feel like judging people or making them feel worse about being stressed is ever effective. And so I would say that depending on the person, what the situation is, find out what's stressing you most. There might be absolutely, reason for you to be stressed and anxious and worried. But still, what can you do to fill your cup and prioritize your own health and your self-care? And sometimes people feel like self-care isn't accessible to them, or they're not worthy of it, or it's just a topic that they don't really resonate with because they don't deserve it. They don't have time, they don't have money, they don't have whatever norms or beliefs. It's like they don't want to allow themselves to think of it that way. But it's really just proactively and consistently taking care of yourself and your health. And whether you call that self-care or not, that's fine. But in the real world, self-care can look like even just setting boundaries where, for example, we're remote working perhaps, and you are feeling like there's a blur where there's no boundaries anymore between your personal life and your work life, and you love work, but now you just don't know what to do with yourself because you're answering notifications at all hours of the day and night, and it just never stops, and you never get a break. Well, so that leads to stress and burnout over time, obviously, right? That's common sense. But let's say that you set a boundary where you're not going to check emails on the weekends, if that's applicable to your job or your life situation, or maybe you delegate or outsource a task that's routine that you really don't need to be doing. Maybe you look at, some ways where you can just take a little bit of a 5-minute walk outside to get some fresh air, and that just is enough to feel like I'm taking a breath, I'm stepping back, and really setting some actionable items into place to get to where you need to be to feel more balanced and to feel like you aren't just crushed, but that you can bounce back and then also bounce forward, right? So it's a matter of this flow and ebb and flow, and starting small and starting basic is really where I like to start with working with clients as a health coach, because oftentimes people don't gravitate to starting small or basic themselves. It's like I'm in, or I'm, doing all these things, or I'm not doing anything. And it doesn't have to be that way. My motto is, for my health coaching practices, being healthy doesn't have to be hard. Right. And I think that we make it out to be so because we try to do so much at once, and we're really hard on ourselves.
And those are really, really good tips. I mean, everyone who's listening, if you're really feeling, like Beth said, that you can't do this, that it's too hard, that there's, self-managing, things like that. Well, some of it is easy as learning to do a breathing exercise. I've learned to do that. It's not something I considered for a long time. And then I started to do it, and I found it to be so helpful.
Yeah, the 4x4 breathing method is so simple. It's easy, accessible, breathing in for 4 counts, holding for 4 counts, exhaling for 4 counts. I mean, it's just like that really down regulates your stress response, and it's very simple, free. Nobody knows you're doing it. And I think people really overlook what really in the dimensions of well-being are. They don't realize that it's not just about nutrition and exercise and movement, which are certainly pillars and foundations, but if somebody is really not sleeping or if they're completely stressed, it doesn't necessarily always matter what they're eating. I mean, it's like, yeah, I can help you with your nutrition because I know all about that. But you are so stressed out right now that no matter what's happening, none of that is going to be effective for you. And so finding meaning, finding connection, finding, financial wellness, intellectual stimulation, the environment around you. And there's so many reasons that we need to, as health and healthcare professionals, as individuals in society, break some of these societal constructs down to better support these marginalized and underserved communities and populations that I can't necessarily speak to or relate to individually myself, but I know they exist. It's just so complicated. But I will say that starting with yourself, you're going to make an impact, because in health behavior change theory, we can actually be both, adopters of change and agents of change at the same time. So that means we learn from each other, our surroundings, the people around us, so we can support each other in this collective well-being effort. It's kind of like the ripple effect, right? So if you start with where you are, with what you control in your own little world, you're going to then impact others around you and so on. So
Oh, sorry. No, I was going to say, just because, there's a whole bunch of things we can talk about and mention, you can start off small, like Beth said, just doing the 4x4 breathing, maybe changing a few things. Your go through can be a healthier habit than a non-healthier habit for your stress, and certainly mindfulness helps. All those things sound more complicated than they actually are. They're actually very simple things to do. The only thing I would tell you is not to do is do nothing. Because then if nothing will change, you have to do something. Beth, I wanted to ask you about something else, to switch gears a little bit, because you and I have talked about this before, and it's true, and I know and you talk about it on your site, and you talk about it as a coach, that people tend, and it was the culture of busyness of, and people have that trap and they fall back into that. Talk to us a little bit about that, because that is a really important topic.
Yeah, I think it's a cultural aspect. I think some people are, again, taking a different path. And I think that the expectations, the social norms, the beliefs that we have about ourselves and our value and our worth perhaps are tied up in some of these things that we do to make ourselves feel important and busy and of value. I know that it's also difficult for me even, but we need to think about ways that we are valuable as humans and not just as productivity machines or outputs, or, I think that those types of things are often overlooked in our particular culture. That's my opinion. And I think that certainly when I'm around somebody, this is what I feel like is what we call a healing presence at MUIH and in other healthcare settings, but we've really infused this as one of our learning objectives in our programs, and as a health and healthcare practitioner, but as a human being. Wouldn't you like to be more of a healing presence as a leader? Wouldn't you like to have, people feel like you've listened to them, you're more compassionate, you've taken time to not judge them, you are self-aware, you are more resilient, you are, somebody who you want to be around, right? And so do you want to be around somebody who reacts to you, I'm so busy, and they're just flying off the wall, and you just feel anxious being around them? I really don't, and I don't want to be that person. So that kind of presents an opportunity for me to step back and to be that model and to be more thoughtful and mindful and present. And if I'm stressed out, acknowledge that I'm stressed, and then just say, hey, I reacted this way. I'm going to do better next time. It's not hurting. I mean, it's not helping myself or anybody around me. It's just hurting people, right? So I think there's opportunities for us to create a different culture, not just being busy is our ultimate, I guess, result and reward. And I think that, again, in organizations, that's more of a creating a culture of wellness. Then it really has to start from the top. It has to be modeled. It has to be supported. And I think that's certainly a challenge. And working with organizations, it'll take some time to create that trust and create some boundaries and rules and policies and structures that will allow that to happen.
Do you think it's part of that culture of busyness is generational? I'm perfectly okay with having less to do now than I was at, say, 25. I know it's a shock. I'm not 25 anymore. But,
yeah,
when you're 25, 35, that constant busyness, does it define you more than it does as you get older?
I don't know about the research on that. I always like to go back to research. I can't say that I've delved into that. I'm sure we could find it. I'm sure there's plenty of research out there. From my own perspective and personal experience, as I get older, 40s here, it's like I still have aspirations. I still enjoy purposeful, meaningful work and contributions. Heck, I've got how many jobs, right? But I've also learned that there's other aspects that I need to fill up. I take some art classes. It's not goal oriented. I have so many goals and projects that really are meaningful that there are aspects when maybe I just watch a funny movie. Maybe I read a book for fun. I just started doing that again. It was like, what? You know what I mean? And it's getting myself back into practices. So perhaps it's generational, perhaps it's getting older, perhaps it's personality, perhaps it's a pandemic.
Maybe.
I don't know.
Maybe it's a combination of all those things.
Right. I think it's an opportunity is what it is for us to not just go back to what we were doing before. And that's, again, it's like we're going to, in the stages of change theory, the trans-theoretical model, health behavior theory, you have your pre-contemplation, contemplation, all these stages, and people overlook the planning and the action, the preparation and the doing. They forget that it takes time. Maintenance is a year or more, and sometimes you fall back, and it's just trying to scoot back, but not so far, and then go back forward again, right? And it's every time you do this, you're building your self-efficacy, which is your self-confidence and your ability to sustain these healthy behaviors. And that is health behavior change theory. It sounds very complicated and it's not easy, but it can be simple if you really just take it one step at a time, which most people don't.
Yeah, I know. We're all society. I want it all now. I want it all fixed.
I want it now, and you know what? But I think what happens when I work with clients is they think one thing in their head, and we focus on actions versus outcomes. I may have mentioned that in the other podcast. The outcome is great. You want to be less stressed, but you need to figure out the actions that are going to perhaps allow you to get to that place, right? It's not that you just wake up one day and become less stressed. Maybe you cultivate a meditation practice where you do your meditation app 3 days a week to start, or maybe 5 minutes in a week, or as little as you need to feel like you can do it, and then build from there and progress and celebrate your successes along the way. And that's where coaching and health coaching is really helpful. It's an opportunity for you to have that guide and partner where we're not necessarily telling you what to do, but we're helping you get there more easily without it being so stressful. Because who wants more stress trying to be healthy?
You know what? You gave us a lot of good tips today. I can see why you're such a great coach. Just to talking about the few of the healthy habits of just the breathing, the mindfulness, all the rest. I know that you can talk a lot more about that, and we unfortunately can't go through it all. people need to understand that you can't, as you say, have it all at the same time. Well, first of all, you would be overwhelming yourself, and that would defeat the purpose of you wanting to maintain healthy habits and feel less burnt out and feel less stress. And as Beth said, some of that stress is good. It keeps us going, keeps us productive, and just like pain, it's a really good teacher. But if you want to learn more about that, you teach a lot and talk a lot about integrative approaches to well-being in ourselves, and where can people learn more about that, and where can they do it self-paced so they can help themselves?
Well, we have a great partnership, and we're going to be launching more courses that we have in partnership, because I'm a big believer in education as a place for people to learn and start. Because I think that without education, if people are just looking for a quick fix, looking at being told what to do, or if you're a health or healthcare practitioner and you want to support your clients and patients in a more integrative way, then think about ways that you can educate people and allow them to then learn themselves. And by doing, they'll be able to maintain their healthy habits. We've got a great list of courses in partnership with the American Institute of Stress on your website that members have a discount on as well. And we'll be launching more courses, and hopefully a resilience and well-being bundle that we'll be offering through your organization as well soon. That's, again, a very easy in terms of accessibility. It's online, self-paced, complete it when you can, no stress. There's lifetime access to these courses so that you can really absorb and reflect and use the content. And as individuals, I encourage you to share this podcast, connect with us and your organization, and stay in these types of circumstances where you can learn from podcasts is great, because just hearing us, maybe you'll be able to take a tip. But Will, your website has so many resources on it already, but the courses that we offer through MUIH, Maryland University of Integrative Health, Professional and Continuing Education, are all listed there. And you can find our website, of course, at muih.edu, and the Professional and Continuing Education Department is on that website. It's /CE. So I really appreciate these conversations we have, because it reminds me to be more mindful and to be a role model and to be practicing as much as I can. Stressful days will come up, but together we can support each other, and we can create this culture of wellness within our own little world. And I think that's really going to make a big difference in individuals' lives.
It's certainly one of the biggest goals of AIS, for people to make a difference in people's lives, and to help them to get through these stressful situations, because you can. One of the things that we don't realize is that there are other people going through it too, and there are ways to do it. About the courses, I took one of those courses. I wanted to see what it was like. And I really have to say I enjoyed it. Besides the fact that I learned a great deal, I enjoyed taking it. And it was easy to do and self-paced. And like Beth said, all you got to do is go to stress.org. You'll see them listed there. We'll probably be listing more soon. And also, Beth has been gracious enough to agree to do a webinar in the near future. And all you have to do is you can see that for free. If you come on when we're doing it live, you're welcome to register. Just check out the site at stress.org when that's going to be. It's going to be in the near future, probably somewhere around January. And if you are a member of AIS, you can always see all our webinars for free. That's why I need you guys to send in a donation, because we keep giving this stuff. Information from Beth and people like her are invaluable. And so I want to thank you, Beth, so much for taking the time to talk with us again today. I learn a lot every time I talk to you. And if you want to learn more about Beth Romanski and My Healthy Transitions Health Coaching, please go to myhealthytransitions.com. And also don't forget, sign up for the MUIH Professional and Continuing Education courses, which are, by the way, certified by the American Institute of Stress. Not every course is. So all you have to do is go to our site click on the course tab, and there we are. And before I sign off and say anything, don't forget, hit that button to subscribe, hit a like button. Appreciate that. I know I hear that whenever I watch YouTube videos too, and I go, okay, well, it's not that big a deal. Hit the button. So that's going to do it for us for today. This has been your host, Will Heckman. It was a pleasure being with all you today. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to follow us. Don't forget to subscribe. Remember, your support helps make these podcasts possible. And I want to remind everyone, just as Beth did, stress is different for each of us. There is no one stress reduction or management strategy that is right for everyone. So that means you need to tune in next time so you can find out some other tools and techniques and skills to live a healthier and happier and a longer life. And I hope the information that you heard from Beth and I today will help you find contentment. So good day, everyone.